this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game called Soul of the Samurai, which is released on the PlayStation 1, and it was developed and published by Konami, and was released in 1999 in North America. But it is interesting to note that in Europe this game is called Ronin Blade, and it's an action-adventure game very similar to Resident Evil, but, minus the scary stuff. Although thinking about it now, it's probably more similar to the Onimusha series, although this one came out first. So as the game begins, you can choose between two characters, and there is Kotaro, who is a samurai, and then there's Lin, who is a lady ninja, or also known as a kunoichi. Now whichever character you pick, the story is going to be different depending on that character. Of course they do meet up with each other every now and then, but for the most part, a lot of the missions are different. Now the main story is pretty basic stuff, it's nothing all that groundbreaking. So all you really gotta know is that there's an evil shogun that's fucking shit up while the two characters, happen to be in the middle of it all. But personally, I don't think the main story is what makes you get into this one. I think it's the characters that make up for that. I like the way how they interact with each other, their backstory is also kind of interesting. And I'd say the writing is pretty decent too, at least for a story that's very basic, but there's nothing wrong with basic at all. But it does have some charming aspects for it, but either way though, I think the story for the most part, it's not really the most important thing about this game, but it is there. Now as for the gameplay itself, it's a pretty open world game. Well, maybe not open world, but there's a lot of exploration you can do. In fact, you can even kill random people in this game, which is pretty funny. But your main objective is just to do some missions and to kill some bosses, so that's pretty good. Now as for the controls, they're alright, but it does take some time to get used to, mainly because this game has tank controls, much like I said, Resident Evil and Onimusha. Now I myself doesn't mind tank controls in games, but of course it does take time to get used to, but it really depends on the game. And I think in this game it does work okay, but the fighting in this game can get pretty in-depth. So there's only one button that you can attack with, but if you just press on the D-pad in different directions, you can actually do different types of attacks. So there is some strategy to it, but depending on the character you're going to use, like if you're going to use Kotaro, he's kind of like a tank. So pretty much you're using a tanky character with tank controls. Wow, is that like tank enough for you? But if you're using Lin, she is much more faster, so there are some different playstyles here. But as for the controls overall, I do think they are pretty good. Now they are responsive and the button layout is pretty easy, although it does take some time to get used to. Especially when there's a bunch of guys in one corridor, because it is kind of hard to multitask on a bunch of guys trying to kill you. But that's really only at the beginning, but much later on, it does get easier once you get more used to it. So the last thing I have to say about the controls is that they're not bad. Man, I just realized something. At first I said they're alright, then I said they're pretty good, and now I'm saying they're not bad. Okay, what I'm trying to say is that the controls are pretty good for what they are, because normally you'd think that having an action game where you use swords, having tank controls, and has like a really weird attacking with the different directions, that it would just be really fucked up, but it actually does work well once you get used to it, so really, I don't have much complaints. Now as for the graphics in this game, I think the graphics are actually really nice looking, especially for the time that this came out. I mean, it does look a lot like, well, as again, Resident Evil and Onimusha with its pre-rendered backgrounds. And of course it has 3D models. But I do really like the 3D models in this game, they're all bright and colorful, and the backgrounds are pretty detailed. But I definitely will have to say that the graphics are probably one of the best part of this game. So overall, I'd say the graphics are actually pretty awesome. Now as for the music in this game, I also think the music is really good and soothing. In fact, I always found Konami always did a pretty good job when it comes to music. And as I said, it really does suit the theme here. So overall, there's really nothing much else I can say, but as again, it's awesome. Now if you want to buy this game, it's going to cost around $12 to $20. Now I remember a couple of years ago, I found a copy of this for like $10, so it is definitely possible to find this game lower than $12. But most of the ones that I have seen that were under $12 were mostly loose discs. But surprisingly, this is a game I don't see around too often. But whenever I do, it's usually pretty cheap, so at least that's a good thing. But I don't know, maybe it could have been the areas that I've been to. But either way, you shouldn't have any problems looking for this game, especially if it's really cheap. Now, if I were to rate this game, I'm gonna have to give it a 7 out of 10. It's not a bad game at all, it's actually pretty good. But it isn't anything like holy shit amazing balls fuck farts. And by the way, what I mean by that is that would be like super amazing. But no, this game isn't amazing by any means, but it is pretty good for what it is. But it is interesting that this game is pretty much like the PS2 game Onimusha, but on a PS1. Although I really don't think this game is as good as that, but of course I'm not trying to compare it to this here. Well, at least when it comes to the quality of this game. But it still has very impressive graphics and music, so it does have that. But the gameplay itself is good, but it isn't like great or amazing like I've already said. Now you may think I'm being a bit generous with this one, but that's mainly has to do with the fact that I really like the graphics, I really like the music, and I also said that I really like the characters as well. And the exploration is pretty cool, even though it is kind of hard to figure out where you're supposed to go at times. But at least if you get frustrated and you don't know what to do, you can just end up cutting a bunch of people and they die. But I think just like any other game out there, you really just have to try it out yourself. I think it's more of like an experience than anything. But thankfully the game is pretty cheap, so even if you ended up not liking it, at least you didn't pay a whole lot of money for it. But I am in a good mood, so yeah, like I said, I think a 7 out of 10 is pretty good with me on this one. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this review. Thank you for watching and commenting.